We're going to talk about the Greeks today. Chapter 5, the Greek experience from 3500 to 30 before Common Era, so BC or BCE. And there's several different, obviously, topics, just like with every other chapter we talked about. So we start off talking about Greece in the Bronze Age and the Dark Age. We move into the development of the polis. We're going to talk about turmoil and culture during the classical period. Then we talk about Hellenistic society and then Hellenistic religion, philosophy, and science towards the end. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Greece in the Bronze Age and the quote, let me pull it up for you, Dark Age. So the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. These were early Greek kingdoms, and they emerged throughout the eastern Mediterranean region, which included the Minoan and the Mycenaean societies. The Minoan, that was a wealthy society, and they were located on the island of Crete. They traded copper, tin, and other goods. The city of Knossos was technologically advanced. They had plumbing, bringing in fresh drinking water, and also it removed sewer waste. The Minoans continued to rebuild their society following earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that happened on a continual basis. The Mycenaean kingdom, that was located in the Peloponnesus and established cities at Thebes, Athens, and other locations. The Mycenaeans were initially at peace with the Minoans, but after an earthquake, the Mycenaeans attacked and conquered the wealthy Minoans. And let's just look at a map really quickly so that you know where we're talking about. So here's the island of Crete. And then here is kind of this peninsula, if you will. This is where the Mycenaeans were located. The Minoans were located here. The Mycenaean kingdom was later destroyed by rival Greeks and other undisclosed entities. The time following the destruction of the Mycenaeans and the Minoans, that was identified as the Dark Ages. And from the Dark Ages, that really inspired the epic tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey, if you've ever heard of those before. So we come out of the Dark period, and we are going to come into the development of the polis. And we have the establishment of the polis was actually the development of a city-state structured in a way that the city was the center and that was supported by the surrounding region. Cities included a centrally located marketplace called an agora that was the political center of the city, and an elevated area, the Acropolis, where temples, altars, and public monuments were erected. Military protection was provided by infantrymen known as hoplites, and they were heavily armed middle and upper middle class citizens serving in the infantry to protect the polis. The Greek systems of government included a democracy where citizens were actively involved in civil administration. The oligarchy was also evident in early Greek society. The oligarchy is the control of power in the hands of only a few of the citizens. Tyranny was a system of unconstitutional seizure of government by one authoritarian ruler. So we've got democracy, oligarchy, and tyranny. Look up all of those in the first part of your book to learn more about them. But we do see overseas expansion and trade, and Greek settlements began to stretch north along the Aegean and the Black Sea. Don't worry, we'll look at a map. And south along the North African coast. Greek populations developed on the island of Sicily and the southern part of the Italian peninsula. So here we have the Black Sea. And this is across, northern Africa. But over here, even into Italy, Sicily, all the way over here into what will become Spain and parts of France. That's kind of cool. The growth of Sparta. So the city-state of Sparta, that was located on the Peloponnesian Peninsula on marginally fertile land. After 30 years of combat, Sparta conquered the region of Messenia to gain agricultural opportunities. The Spartan foot soldiers protested, calling for an increase in their rights and forcing the aristocrats to remodel the state under a new system. And under this system, every citizen, they owed their allegiance to Sparta and was they were expected to place Sparta's military defense over their own personal needs. So we see boys begin military training at the age of 7, and they were lifelong soldiers. They were expected to never retreat from battle. While men were expected to dedicate their lives to military service, women ran the estates and owned the land. Spartan soldiers seldom saw their wives, often making same-sex relations more meaningful. Military leaders believed these relationships encouraged a much more dedicated and fierce combat soldier. Here's a Spartan hoplite, those that were of the middle and upper middle class foot soldiers. So that's what's happening in Sparta. Let's talk about the evolution of Athens. So aristocrats in the city-state of Athens, they began to seize property of smaller landholders. Changes in the law were made by Draco, an Athenian aristocrat, but the nobles continued to oppress small farmers, many of whom were sold into slavery to settle up their debts. Real reform came under the leadership of Solon, who allowed the nobles to keep their land but freed the people who were enslaved because of debt. Solon allowed the commoners to vote in elections for the magistrates, transforming Athens into a democracy. The democracy functioned on the ideal that all full citizens should play a role in government. Making laws was the responsibility of 2 assemblies of citizens. In the Athenian democracy, women, outsiders, and slaves could not be citizens. So now we're going to move on. We've got 2 of our city-states set up, right? We're going to come back to them, I promise. We're going to talk about some deadly conflicts. This is 499 to 404. Initial attacks from the Persian Empire were defeated at the Battle of Marathon. Later, Persian attempts to conquer Greece ended when Persian King Xerxes' forces were defeated. The Delian League, a naval alliance, was formed to liberate Ionian Greek city-states from Persian oppression. This force turned Athens into an empire. Under the leadership of Pericles, Athenian power began to alarm Sparta, drawing the Spartans and Athenians into the Peloponnesian War. While Athenian forces were finally defeated on the island of Sicily, both Sparta and Athens were left in a weakened position. Let's back up a little bit, back up to 500 to 323, and talk about some of the Athenian arts in the age of Pericles. Pericles was responsible for making Athens a Greek cultural showplace. New temples, including the Parthenon, were built. Classic Greek drama flourished under Pericles' rule. Plays were included as a part of the city's religious festivals. Sophocles wrote the Greek classic Oedipus the King, while others are going to also write. We have like some other plays that really define Greek arts during the Athenian period. So this is part of the Persian Wars. You can see Crete here that we talked about, where the Minoans came from. But then also, like, this is Greece, right, and the peninsula off of there. This is Persia coming in and slowly trying to creep in on Greek. So you've got neutral Greek states like Crete, but then you also have Greek states that were at war with Persia here in the orange, and you can see these are the battles, like the Battle of Marathon. We talked about that. The Delian League that formed as part of the Persian War. You can see who all was members of the Delian League, or those that were allies with the League. And then here is the Acropolis that we talked about a few slides ago. Now we move into like more of the structure, social hierarchies, and sexual relations during the classical period. So skilled craftsmen and tradesmen influenced the Athens economy. Men without skills were laborers, and slavery was central to the social structure, economy, and culture. Women were protected by law, but they didn't really have a whole lot of public roles. Their main function was to raise children. Prostitution was legal in Athens, and we do see sophisticated courtesans, it's just a fancy word for prostitutes, accompanied men in public settings where wives would not have been welcome. Same-sex relations were part of Athens' social culture. Young male students were expected to maintain the hierarchical sexual and educational relationship with an older man. We do see Greek religion was polytheistic, right? Most of you are probably monotheistic, a belief in one god, but Greeks believed in many gods. Think of like Mount Olympus. That's where their gods were said to live, all on Mount Olympus. Zeus was the king of the gods, who was married to Hera, who was also Zeus's sister. Other gods included, you've probably heard of these before, like Apollo, Athena, Hercules, and a whole bunch of others. Other than the Olympian gods, each city-state had its own minor god, with a host of local worshippers. Greek religion did not include sacred writings or ethical codes of conduct. Religious festivals included athletic contests that inspired the modern Olympic Games. So what about the development of philosophy? We have a lot of Greek philosophy that influences, like, even us today. Hippocrates searched for natural causes for illness and hunted for natural ways to treat them. The Sophists, they were a group of thinkers who applied philosophical speculation to all aspects of society. Socrates applied philosophy to politics and questioned the Athenian traditions. He was accused of corrupting the youth and he was executed. One of his students, Plato, he presented more of Socrates' work. According to Plato, there were two worlds, the impermanent and the internal. So your worldly and then the eternal realm. Plato also discussed his views that true knowledge and the virtuous life do not come from observing the visible world. These were only imperfect examples that surrounded an individual. Aristotle believed that true knowledge was possible, but unlike Plato, he argued that true knowledge came from observing the world. Those three, just remember them, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, those three philosophers have such a huge influence. If you ever start to study education, or really any type of philosophy, you're going to run into those three again. So just kind of getting that basic knowledge, there's so much more about those three. You can go back and read a little bit more in the book. So how do we move from a polis, from those city-states, to a monarchy? Well, following the Peloponnesian War, conflicts continued as Athens, Sparta, and Thebes each continued to try to create a political system in which it would dominate. Philip II of Macedonia gained control of the northern Aegean, conquering Greece, and unified the Greek city-states under the Macedonian kingdom. Following the assassination of Philip II, his son Alexander became the Macedonian ruler. Alexander set out to conquer the Persians and eventually reached the Indus River Valley. The Macedonian ruler died while in Babylon and left a vast empire with no heir. Alexander's empire was divided into thirds. Ptolemy seized Egypt, Antigonus kept control in Macedonia and Greece, and Seleucus ruled Western Asia to the Indus River Valley. Don't worry, I've got a map for you guys, as always. So here we have Alexander's empire in 322, the territory added by 330, and then added by 326. So you can see him expanding, getting all the way into the Indus Valley, and then this is where he dies in Babylon. And then this empire is going to be split into thirds. So then we move into Hellenistic society and a Hellenized society. So Hellenistic cities, those included cultural centers. We're going to see theaters, temples, libraries, and economic centers. The ruling dynasties were Macedonian, while both Greeks and Macedonians filled political, military, and diplomatic positions. While the kingdom shared aspects of the Hellenistic world, they were never truly united in cultural aspects of language, customs, or thought. Seleucus's domain, now identified as an empire, had no desire for extensive Hellenizing of the native populations. The Ptolemaic kings in Egypt promoted Greek culture over Egyptian culture, which led to a lot of resentment and civil unrest. The majority of people in Hellenistic society were farmers. Technology was applied to military needs, but not the production of food, and manual labor was still necessary. Alexander used the wealth of the Persian Empire to finance the building of new cities and infrastructure. However, this led to inflation and further hardship. The cities throughout Alexander's empire became trading markets that were linked together in newly established trade routes with overland caravans. Commerce was quickly established from the Indus River Valley to Egypt and into the European regions, and exchanged rare and exotic commodities throughout the civilized world. Here's a breakdown of the Hellenistic world. And you've got the Ptolemaic kingdom here in Egypt. You've got Seleucus's kingdom there in green. Antigonoid kingdom in Antigonus, and some others, some independent nation kingdoms and leagues along the north here. Religion. Mystery religions developed that adopted traits of both Greek and Eastern religious doctrines and rituals. The mystery religion that developed in Egypt with the devotion to the goddess Isis became the most popular. The devotion to Isis spread throughout Greece and continued later into Rome. So you're going to see Isis popping up in Greek mythology and in Roman mythology, as well as Egyptian. Epicurus taught that pleasure was the principal good of life. So now we have philosophy and how that's applied to guidance for life. And this philosophy became known as Epicureanism and followed on a life of contentment, free from fear and suffering. Zeno argued the opposite of Epicurus. His philosophy was identified as Stoicism, which claimed that people can only be happy when they are in accordance with nature. So we have those two religions that come out of this period. The economy that was set up during this time. So we have trade networks that stretch into China to trade for silk, naming the heavily traveled route the Silk Road. Ingenious, right? It's like the War of 1812. We couldn't come up with a better name. For many cities that would not grow their own food supply, grain traded on the routes was vital. The slave traders found the routes useful because cities and temples throughout the civilized world used slave labor. We're going to end this chapter on science and medicine. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the elements of geometry. That was compiled by the mathematician Euclid, and that became the foundation for the study of geometry. Kind of makes sense when we have Greek symbols, right? It came from a Greek. Hellenistic science was often used for purposes of war. Archimedes developed artillery and a device that would draw water from lower levels. Maybe you've heard of Archimedes' screw. That's that device that would draw water from lower levels. And then we have the study of medicine that continued with Herophilus, who dissected corpses and documented what he observed. He is recognizing for identifying the motor and sensory nerves. So a lot of stuff that we use today and a lot of technology that we have, it's all based from this Hellenistic science and medicine, and when that was starting to come out. So really advanced for their time, kind of pushing us into a modern era, although we're not into a modern era just yet. So the next chapter we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about the Romans. We're going to give just a brief overview of the Romans, just like we did in this chapter with the Greeks.